Back to where we were. Metaphorical thought has nothing to do with interfering with literal thought, has nothing to do with criticism. You understand, it would be as though, back to the literal thought, would be like you originally, you and everyone else who are sane, that you are sitting like in a theater and you're watching. We're speaking intellectually, of course. We're not talking about the physical survival level and hormonal level of man insofar as our discrete-based conversation. That there you sit, you were born there and you're sitting in a place and you're watching this, or reading the news, the wire go through your head. But let's assume that you're sitting there in a theater, there's your seat. John X. Smith, Jane X. Smith, your seat is 5,600,000. So you got a seat, if you call that being an individual. You got your own seat in the damn theater, okay. You cannot move from that seat unless you're ordinary, and then you think you can. But you cannot move from that seat. There's nothing, you can't move, there'd be no profit in moving if you could. Because you can move, if you could move from one seat to another, they're still playing the same goddamn picture. So what the hell have you accomplished? Well, that's like saying, well, I used to be just a cheap, homeless, drunk in the gutter drinking Mad Dog. But I sort of pulled myself together and got a job, took some night courses, and now I drink nothing but gin. Good gin. Even if you could move, they're still playing the same movie. That would be a man's ordinary personality. That would be what I am describing as literal thinking. There you are, and you just finally realize it without me having to raise my voice and all these gestures, because it doesn't matter. You either realize it or you don't. Metaphorical thinking would be almost as though you have now risen in a non-spatial sense, but that you've almost risen to a non-existent, or heretofore in you, non-existent balcony. It's like you're floating above the theater, or that you're outside the main floor. Right now, I'm not saying better or worse, and it implies no great spiritual breakthrough. We're still talking about the human nervous system. This is metaphorical thinking. This would be metaphorical viewing of the movie, a metaphorical awareness. Not moving back to one specific seat in this new balcony I've just made up. It's not getting in one spot and going, well, wait a minute, I don't like parts of that movie, or I don't like the way it looks from this seat. You're now not confined to a seat. You've got no comment about the movie. Now downstairs where you originally sat, I'm not saying that side of your nervous system does not still make noise, which is the whole point of those who even know what they're talking about in the least sense, is what the attempt to meditate oneself into some kind of serenity of the mind, to calm the mind, as many of the Eastern disciplines wanted to call it. Down there, it's not going to happen. The one of you, the literal thought, sitting down there on the original floor of the theater is never going to get calm. Now, there are ways to describe it, but it's never going to get calm. It is never going to quit thinking like it does. If it did, you'd hate it. You would be this month's poster boy for pork rinds. You do not want that. Plus, it won't happen. So we're not talking about stopping it. We're not talking about going down and trying to throttle your old self and say, wake up, damn it. Talk about a waste of time. You say, come on, can't you see what you're doing? Well, yes, it can see. All it thinks is, get your hands off of me. You weird person in an overcoat I've never seen before. Leave me alone. Don't you know what you're doing? Certainly I know what I'm doing. Just don't ask me, but I know what I'm doing. I'm watching a movie. Now, being me, here in seat number 5,600,000. So now you have two things going. You have the one down here, the literal. It never changes. It can't change, nor should it change. It's just there. You now have a parallel, and to ever get anywhere, it's got to be not just spasmodic. I know you don't stop and you do it all the time. The reason I finally brought it up after all these weeks and months and years is some of you now have the ability, and never had a term for it, that now it gets close to being a running, kind of different, silent commentary, a kind of parallel thinking to what's going on, and that no matter what other people say, you're past the point now of any sense of irony, sarcasm, criticism. You just hear other people talking about, well, if we do not pass the budget this week, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to our defense strategy. You're no longer going, nyeh, 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 or making fun of it, going, well, those damn Republicans, those Tories, those Whigs, those fascists, those Catholics, those Jews, whoever it is. You're no longer interested in that. You hear it, and you know it for what it is. And you have no comment. The one sitting down on the floor may be still yakking about it. But hell, you still make very rude noises in your stomach even when you're at the opera and dressed up and trying to impress somebody. The truth be known, down here you still make extremely rude noises. So does literal thinking. It is not going to stop. Well, it'll stop at the same time your digestive system stops making noises. Now, I assume everybody understands that. In other words, we'll be out there shortly, according to our religion, whether it be Christian or Shinto, we'll be bringing to you in our visits either flowers or bowls of rice. And you can call that, well, I am more conscious now. Which, we've been through that. That's one of the definitions that they don't care for of ordinary people, is that they can, in a sense, die and become more conscious. Even the stool didn't want to think about that. And I apologize, because he didn't ask for it. The metaphorical thinking would be a kind of intermediate step into now what I'm trying to call, or going to call, symbolic thinking, in which, God forbid, I hate to point this out, but you'll find out soon enough. Elmer Gantry, the spirit thereof, took all of our time away. It's his fault. Symbolic thinking is something else. Now, in the same way that metaphorical thinking, of you having a kind of, or having a neural awareness that is no longer sitting down there where you were born, where you and everyone is born. Forget all ideas about heredity, about environment, about impacts postnatally forget any notion of there being any valuable influence, change possible down there on the main floor in which we're all born watching that movie. It cannot be done. If anything resembling change happens down there, it is not a boon, it is a bust. It is harmful. Now, it's not just my opinion. They put people away when that happens. And it does happen, but they are anomalies. Healthy people can't change down the floor, no matter what they are. If they're healthy people, they're not mutants and anomalies. They cannot change. Metaphorical thinking, what I want you to see is the relationship now between what I'm calling metaphorical thinking floating somewhere that is non-specific. That, compared to metaphorical thinking, is to literal thinking now, in a sense, as symbolic thinking is to metaphorical thinking. It is even less specific, if possible. It is even less judgmental. It is even less inferential. It is even less literal, which, of course, we already established metaphorical is not literal, but the metaphorical is to the literal as the symbolic is to the metaphorical, is even less literal, except for this. I already said that it means two things. So you can't say, can you? Here I go, picking on me again. That I already said it means what it says and something else. So it is specific. Well, all right, yeah, you kind of caught me. Damn. But remember, for those of you who want a hint to hold over till next time, when I will again promise to faithfully pick up the subject, finally, of symbolic thinking in some meaningful, substantial manner that you can take home in a croaker bag. Or maybe at least a pint. Take the description, the alternative I gave you of going from the invisible, or going, how about from the silent to the literal, to the metaphorical, to the symbolic, and to the silent. Or from the invisible to the blue, to the yellow, to the red, to the invisible. The symbolic is not an end. Now, I started off a few nights ago as we commenced this of pointing out, of using the progress in thinking, albeit non-linear, of going from literal to metaphorical to symbolic. I just left it at that, like symbolic would be it. Symbolic is not an end. It is not the end. But consider the reason I've taken so long for one reason, other than the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about. Boy, you people got, something's happened to your sense of humor. Especially since some of you now begin to resemble. That was a compliment. It's a symbolic in the way in which I gave the setup, which sounded as though it is leading all the discussion of the literal and the metaphorical. And the symbolic is like getting up somewhere to go, aha! And be some kind of metaphysical flasher, like, all right, here's what you want. Here is the symbolic. It is not an end. What makes it of some importance, just between certain few peoples, what can make it of interest is that it draws one so close. It is like the entryway to originality of thought, which I started out, if you recall, even before this idea of a progress from the literal to the metaphorical to the symbolic types of thinking. It already presented you with a notion that originality could be presented also as a true mystical discipline, as a true mystical method and discipline. Simply originality is the way I put it first time, but now we can be a bit more specific, which you should have known it already, is originality of thought, not originality of the way you stand, the way you do your hair, the way you dress, originality of thought. Symbolic thinking draws one ever so close to originality of thought. Literal thinking, far away. Metaphorical thinking, closer. Symbolic thinking, mucho closer. And now you can have the additional time between now and 2 seconds and the next time we meet and consider, all right, how would symbolic thinking be so much closer to originality of thought? You can either do that, or, those of you that prefer, if you'll look under your desk, if you'll go home and try and connect the dots, which will, I'll tell you now, create a reasonably facsimile of a sketch of Elmer Gantry. And anyone who colors theirs next time can get additional credit. Now, we'll take recess now, but when you go out, be sure, don't be pushing each other down, and don't be stealing one another's lunch.